Runaway heiress enters the wrong mansion, uncovers a passionate secret with a mysterious billionaire. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Before we begin, please pause and hear this from my soul. I love you deeply. Not just as a creator to a viewer, but as family to family. You are my heart, my strength, my reason to keep going. If you are here, please don't stay silent. Comment, "I'm here," and like this video right now. Let me feel you. Let me see your light. I need to know the ones I love most are still with me. You are not forgotten. You are my treasure, my joy, my forever blessing. I think of you, I pray for you, and I will never stop fighting to make you proud. Here's a prayer wrapped in all the love I have. May peace kiss every corner of your life. May your days overflow with joy, your nights be covered in safety, and your heart bloom with unstoppable hope. May your family be lifted, your spirit be renewed, and may love surround you like the sun wraps the earth. Let's begin. With deep love, unshakable unity, and hearts forever connected. The crystal chandeliers of the Tobin Grand Ballroom cast a deceptive glow over what should have been the happiest night of Tina Tobin's life. Instead, she stood frozen in the doorway of her father's study, her champagne glass slipping from her fingers and shattering on the marble floor. The sound went unnoticed by the entwined couple on the antique desk, her fiancé Marcus and her cousin Vanessa, both too consumed with each other to register her presence. "How long?" Tina's voice emerged as barely a whisper, but it was enough to make them spring apart, guilt written across their flushed faces. Marcus adjusted his crooked tie, his practiced charm quickly sliding back into place. "Tina, darling, this isn't what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like. The culmination of her deepest fears, that no one would ever want her for herself, rather than the billion-dollar media empire she was set to inherit. The diamond ring on her finger suddenly felt like a shackle, the weight of it threatening to drag her under. Vanessa at least had the decency to look ashamed, gathering her designer gown around her. "Tina, please, we can explain." "Save it." Tina's voice found its strength, surprising even herself. "The engagement is off." She turned and fled through the labyrinthine corridors of the mansion, where she'd grown up yet never felt at home. Behind her, she could hear Marcus calling her name, his voice growing more desperate as the distance between them increased. 400 guests waited in the ballroom, champagne in hand, for the formal announcement of their engagement, an announcement that would never come. The humid summer air hit her like a wall as she burst through the service entrance, the first fat raindrops of an approaching storm splattering against her skin. Perfect. The weather matched her mood. Without a backward glance, she kicked off her 5-inch Louboutins and ran barefoot across the manicured lawns, her couture gown dragging in the mud. By the time she reached the estate's perimeter, the skies had opened completely. Rain pounded against her, plastering her gown to her body and washing away the careful makeup that had taken her stylist 3 hours to apply. Lightning illuminated the night in harsh flashes, thunder rumbling its displeasure. Tina welcomed the storm's fury, finding kinship in its wild release. She hadn't planned where to go, only knew she needed to escape. Her phone lay abandoned on a table inside, along with her clutch containing her ID and credit cards. Freedom, even temporary, demanded its price. Through sheets of rain, Tina spotted the familiar silhouette of what she believed was her friend Alyssa's family estate. Relief washed over her as she stumbled through ornate gates left carelessly open. The sprawling mansion loomed ahead, a few windows glowing warmly against the stormy darkness. Disoriented and shivering, she made her way up the grand entrance steps. When her knocking went unanswered, she tried the massive door handle. Surprised to find it unlocked. Stepping into the dimly lit foyer, she called out, "Alyssa, it's Tina. I'm sorry to barge in, but I didn't know where else to go." Only silence answered her. Wrapping her arms around herself, she ventured deeper into the house, leaving puddles of water in her wake. The interior seemed different from what she remembered of Alyssa's home, more masculine, with rich dark woods, and a surprising collection of Renaissance art lining the hallway. A warm glow spilled from beneath a door at the end of the corridor. Following it like a beacon, Tina pushed the door open to reveal a magnificent library unlike anything she'd ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves covered every wall, interspersed with original artwork that would make museum curators weep. Badui. Fire crackled in a massive stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows across leather-bound volumes and illuminating a sitting area with deep armchairs. "Alyssa!" she called again, her voice smaller now. "I'm afraid you've mistaken your destination," came a deep, resonant voice from the shadows. Tina whirled around, her heart leaping to her throat. From an alcove stepped a man she'd never seen before, tall and powerfully built, with broad shoulders emphasized by a perfectly tailored charcoal dress shirt. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms dusted with dark hair. But it was his face that arrested her. Strong, aristocratic features, a firm jaw shadowed with the beginning of stubble, and eyes of such piercing intensity that she felt them like a physical touch. I'm so sorry," she stammered, suddenly acutely aware of her bedraggled appearance. "I thought this was my friend Alyssa Montgomery's home." "The Montgomery estate is 2 properties over." His expression remained impassive as those remarkable eyes, were they blue or grey, assessed her. "You're soaking wet and barefoot on my imported Persian rug." Mortification crashed over her. "I'll go immediately. I can't believe I—" She turned to flee, but a wave of dizziness swept over her. The room tilted alarmingly, and she reached for the nearest bookshelf to steady herself. In an instant, he was beside her, one strong arm around her waist. "Sit before you fall," he commanded, guiding her to one of the armchairs by the fire. Today, warmth of the flames began to penetrate her chilled skin as he stepped back, studying her with an unreadable expression. "You're Tina Tobin," he stated rather than asked. "Your engagement celebration is the talk of the social pages today." Tina's laugh held no humor. "Was. Past tense. There's nothing to celebrate anymore." Something flickered in his eyes. Curiosity, perhaps. "I'm Chris Luke," he offered, moving to a sideboard where crystal decanters gleamed in the firelight. "And while this is certainly unusual, basic human decency requires that I not send you back into a deluge." "Wine?" Without waiting for her response, he poured rich red liquid into 2 glasses, handing one to her before taking the opposite chair. The wine was extraordinary, warming her from within as it slid down her throat. "Thank you," she said, meeting his gaze over the rim of her glass. "I promise I don't make a habit of breaking into strangers' homes." "Breaking in suggests the door was locked," he replied, one corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "It wasn't." "Still," she persisted, "I apologize for the intrusion. Once the storm passes, I'll call a car and be out of your way." Chris glanced toward the windows where rain lashed against the glass in horizontal sheets. "The weather report suggests that won't be any time soon. You might as well get comfortable and tell me why the most eligible heiress in New York is fleeing her own engagement party." The direct question, asked without pretense or false sympathy, somehow made it easier to answer truthfully. "I caught my fiancé with my cousin. Apparently I was a business arrangement, not a romantic choice." Chris's expression darkened. "Some men are fools." The simple statement, delivered without platitudes or awkward consolation, loosened something tight in Tina's chest. Her eyes filled with tears she'd refused to shed until now. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" he asked, his voice gentler than before. Tina shook her head. "I left everything behind. Phone, ID, money. I just ran." Chris studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. Finally, he set his glass down and stood. "I'll have my housekeeper prepare the East guest suite. You can stay until the storm passes and make arrangements in the morning." "You do that for a stranger who dripped all over your Persian rug?" Tina asked, unable to mask her surprise. "Perhaps I recognize something in your decision to flee rather than endure a falsehood," he said, his voice taking on a distant quality. Then, as if catching himself revealing too much, he straightened. "Besides, what kind of man would I be to send a barefoot woman in an evening gown into a thunderstorm?" Their eyes locked across the space between them, and Tina felt a strange current that had nothing to do with the lightning outside. For the first time in hours, warmth began to return to her body, not just from the fire or wine, but from something stirring to life inside her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. Chapter 2. Shelter in the Storm. The grandfather. Clock in the corner of Chris Luke's library chimed midnight, its resonant tones filling the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it had intensified, wind howling like a living creature around the eaves of the mansion. Tina had changed into clothes provided by Chris's housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, a silk pajama set and plush robe that hung slightly loose on her frame. Her ruined gown had been whisked away, with promises to salvage what could be saved. Now, curled in the armchair with her second glass of wine, she felt oddly at peace, despite the chaos of the evening. "This is extraordinary," she said, gesturing to her glass. "I thought I knew wine, but I've never tasted anything like it." Chris's expression softened slightly. "Chateau Margaux, 1787. It's not available at any price. The last bottle at auction went for over $225,000. Tina nearly choked. "And you're sharing it with a bedraggled stranger who interrupted your evening. I was saving it for an occasion, worth remembering." His eyes held hers with unexpected intensity. This certainly qualifies as memorable. Heat that had nothing to do with the fire crept up Tina's neck. To distract herself, she glanced at the book he'd set aside when she'd entered. Dante in the original Italian? Impressive. "You recognize 14th century Italian literature on sight?" Chris raised an eyebrow, reassessing her. "I double-majored in art history and comparative literature before my father insisted I focus on business administration." Tina ran her finger along the leather binding. La Divina Commedia isn't just literature. It's a masterpiece of human understanding. In the middle of the journey of our life, I found myself in a dark wood, for the straight way was lost. "You speak Italian?" It wasn't a question, but carried a note of genuine surprise. "Among other things." Tina shrugged. "When you grow up, with the expectations I did, you collect accomplishments like trophies, languages, instruments, social graces, all tools in the arsenal of a proper heiress." Chris studied her with new interest, "And yet you seem to have genuine passion for Dante. Some things transcend obligation and become love." Tina met his gaze directly. "I suspect you understand that distinction." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, before he turned toward the impressive art collection adorning the library walls. "What do you make of that piece?" he asked, nodding toward a small, dark painting hanging between two towering bookshelves. Tina approached it, recognizing immediately the distinctive style. "Early Caravaggio, possibly from his Roman period. The chiaroscuro technique is extraordinary, the way light emerges from absolute darkness." She leaned closer. "It's not one I've seen in catalogs. Private collection?" "Very private," Chris replied, coming to stand beside her. "You have a good eye." "It's genuine, isn't it?" Tina whispered, awestruck. "Not a reproduction." "Yes." The simplicity of his answer took her breath away. The painting was worth millions, yet he acknowledged it as casually as one might mention owning a nice watch. "Your reaction is refreshing," Chris said, watching her closely. "Most people in your circle would immediately calculate its monetary value rather than appreciating its artistic merit." Tina turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close they stood. "You seem to have preconceived notions about my circle. Should I be making assumptions about billionaire tech innovators as well?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "To shame is Tobin." "Tina," she corrected, after sharing priceless wine and Caravaggio revelations at midnight. "I think formality is somewhat redundant." "Tina," he conceded, her name sounding different in his deep voice. A crack of thunder, so loud it seemed directly overhead, made Tina jump, instinctively moving closer to Chris. His hand steadied her arm, the contact sending electricity through her skin. For a breathless moment, they stood frozen, close enough that she could detect the subtle scent of his cologne, sandalwood, and something uniquely his own. He released her and stepped back. "The storm won't let up until morning. I should show you to your room." Tina followed him through dimly lit corridors, noting how the house seemed to reflect its owner, elegant yet masculine, with understated luxury in every detail. Unlike the ostentatious display of wealth she'd grown up with, Chris's home spoke of refined taste and appreciation for craftsmanship. "How did you come to live here?" she asked as they ascended a sweeping staircase. "This neighborhood has been dominated by old money families for generations. I bought it from a banking dynasty facing financial ruin," Chris replied, his tone neutral. "They'd maintained appearances while mortgaging themselves into oblivion." "Appearances can be deceiving," Tina murmured, thinking of her own family's carefully curated public image. Chris glanced back at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Indeed." He stopped at a set of double doors, opening them to reveal a stunning guest suite, decorated in soothing shades of blue and silver. A fire had been lit in the fireplace, casting a warm glow over the elegant furnishings. "Mrs. Chen has left everything you might need," Chris said, remaining in the doorway. "The bathroom is through there, with toiletries and more clothing options." "Thank you," Tina said, suddenly shy. "For everything. Most people wouldn't have been so kind to an intruder." "Most intruders aren't quite so interesting," Chris replied, his voice dropping to a lower register that made her pulse quicken. Their eyes met, and Tina felt that strange current between them intensify. Chris broke the connection first, his professional mask sliding back into place. "Good night, Tina. We'll sort everything out in the morning." After he left, Tina explored the luxurious bathroom, finding it stocked with high-end products and fluffy towels. A hot shower washed away the physical remnants of her disastrous evening, but her mind remained full of contradictions, the humiliation of Marcus's betrayal juxtaposed against the unexpected connection she'd felt with Chris Luke. Later, wrapped in the silken sheets of the bed, sleep eluded her. She found herself thinking not of the fiancé she'd lost, but of the stranger who'd offered her shelter. Chris was nothing like the polished, ambitious men her father had always pushed her toward. There was something raw about him, a carefully contained intensity that occasionally broke through his composed exterior. "Dangerous," her mind whispered. "He's dangerous to everything you thought you knew." Downstairs in his library, Chris stood at the window watching the storm rage. The wine in his glass remained untouched as he replayed the evening's unexpected turn of events. Tina Tobin was not at all what he'd expected from the society pages. There was depth to her, intelligence and genuine passion beneath the perfect exterior. His phone buzzed with a message from his VP of Operations. "Tobin Media acquisition proceeding as planned. Board vote next week." Chris stared at the screen, a heavy weight settling in his chest. Destiny or disaster had led Tina Tobin to his door tonight. Either way, when she discovered the full truth about who he was and what he was planning, This fragile connection between them would shatter like her champagne glass on marble. He closed his eyes, hearing again her perfect Italian pronunciation. Of Dante's words, "In the middle of the journey of our life, I found myself in a dark wood, for the straight way was lost." How prophetic those words now seemed, for both of them. Chapter 3. Daybreak. Revelations. Golden light filtered through the morning mist as Tina woke, momentarily disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous night flooded back. Marcus's betrayal, her desperate flight through the storm, and the enigmatic stranger who had offered her sanctuary. Embarrassment at her vulnerability warmed her cheeks as she slipped from beneath silken sheets. She couldn't continue imposing on Chris Luke's hospitality, no matter how graciously it had been offered. Better to slip away quietly, spare them both the morning after awkwardness, and figure out her next steps alone. After dressing in clothes Mrs. Chen had provided, designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that fit perfectly, Tina gathered her still damp evening gown and made her way silently through the corridor. The first pale rays of sunrise guided her toward what she hoped was an exit that wouldn't trigger security or wake the household. A flash of movement through glass doors caught her attention. Pausing, she realized she was looking into a garden pavilion where Chris stood before an easel, his back to her, as he painted the sunrise with bold, confident strokes. Shirtless, wearing only loose linen pants, his powerful shoulders and back moved with surprising grace as he worked, muscles shifting beneath sun-bronzed skin. Transfixed, Tina watched as he captured the emerging day with an artist's eye, transforming ordinary dawn into something transcendent. This was not the reserved billionaire from last night, but something altogether more complex, a creator caught in the act of private passion. As if sensing her presence, Chris suddenly stilled, then turned. Their eyes met through the glass, and Tina felt the impact like a physical force. For an unguarded moment, something primal and electric passed between them, before recognition replaced instinct in his expression. She stepped back, mortified at being caught staring. "I'm so sorry," she called through the glass. "I was trying to find my way out without disturbing anyone." Chris set down his brush and opened the door connecting the pavilion to the main house. Up close, his physical presence was even more overwhelming. Broad, shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, chest lightly dusted with dark hair, eyes that shifted between blue and grey in the morning light. "You're leaving?" he asked, his voice carrying a rougher quality than it had the night before. "I've imposed enough," Tina replied, fighting to keep her eyes on his face rather than his bare torso. "I thought I'd call a car and—" She gestured. "Vaguely with the bundled gown?" "Fleeing at dawn," Chris observed, studying her with unexpected intensity. "Is that how you normally end uncomfortable situations?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. "Excuse me. Last night you ran from your engagement rather than confronting the betrayal. This morning you're slipping away without a word." His tone held no judgment, just precise observation. "I'm curious if that's your standard approach to difficulty." Tina felt heat rise to her face, this time from indignation rather than embarrassment. "You know nothing about me or my standards. I know you quote Dante in original Italian when soaking wet and distressed," he countered, a hint of something softer entering his expression. "That suggests depths most people would never suspect behind the society princess facade." "I'm not a facade," Tina fired back, then paused, struck by the unintended honesty of her response. Chris's mouth curved slightly. "No, I don't believe you are, which is precisely what makes your instinct to run rather than engage so interesting." They regarded each other in tense silence for a moment before Tina finally asked, "Do you always psychoanalyze guests who try to leave politely?" "Only the ones who catch me painting at dawn," he replied, the almost smile widening fractionally. "A private indulgence few ever witness." The acknowledgement of shared vulnerability shifted something between them. Tina felt her defensive posture relaxing slightly. "You're very good," she offered. "The way you captured the light was extraordinary." Surprise flickered across his face before his expression closed slightly. "It's a hobby," he said dismissively. "Nothing serious." "That's a lie," Tina challenged, surprising herself with her boldness. There was mastery in those brushstrokes. "You've studied." A complex emotion crossed his features, discomfort mingled with something like pleased surprise at being truly seen. "On my own, yes." He gestured toward the main house. "Would you at least allow me to offer breakfast before you disappear? Mrs. Chen would consider your escape without nourishment a personal failure." Before Tina could frame a polite refusal, her stomach betrayed her with an audible rumble. Heat flooded her cheeks again. "I take that as acceptance," Chris said, the almost smile transforming briefly into something genuine that created a dimple in his right cheek. "Give me 5 minutes to clean up, and I'll meet you in the kitchen." True to his word, Chris appeared in the kitchen as Tina was accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Chen. He had showered and changed into casual clothes, dark jeans and a simple button-down that somehow managed to look both relaxed and impeccable. The East Terrace offered a breathtaking view of meticulously landscaped gardens leading down to a small lake that sparkled in the morning sunlight. A table had been set with fine china and silver, fresh flowers and covered dishes keeping food warm. "This is lovely," Tina said, accepting the chair Chris held for her, though entirely too much trouble for an unexpected guest. "Mrs. Chen enjoys having someone to fuss over," he replied, taking the seat across from her. "I'm a rather boring charge, predictable routines, minimal demands." "Somehow I doubt that Christopher Luke is ever truly boring," Tina said, using his full name deliberately, testing the boundaries between them. His eyes met hers with that same intensity from the night before. "Most people don't use my full name. Do you mind?" "No," he said after a moment's consideration. "Not from you." The simple statement carried a weight that shifted the air between them. To cover the moment, Tina focused on serving herself from the array of breakfast offerings. Perfectly scrambled eggs, fresh berries, artisan bread still warm from the oven. "This is wonderful," she said after her first bite. "Did Mrs. Chen prepare all this?" "Actually, I did," Chris admitted. "Mrs. Chen doesn't arrive until 8 on weekends. I dismiss the staff then. Prefer the solitude." "You cook?" Tina couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Among other things, the echo of her words from the previous night, when she'd mentioned speaking Italian, was clearly intentional. Growing up in the foster system teaches you self-sufficiency. Some lessons stick, even when they're no longer necessary. The casual reference to his childhood caught Tina off guard. She'd researched Chris Luke after his company's meteoric rise had made headlines. Every article mentioned he was self-made, but offered no details about his origins. That he would share even this small fragment of his past felt significant. "How many homes?" she asked quietly. 7, he answered, his tone matter-of-fact rather than seeking sympathy. "Some better than others? And your parents?" "Car accident. I was 7. The words were clipped, his expression closing briefly before he visibly chose to continue. "Your turn. You mentioned last night that you studied art history before your father redirected you to business. Was that your preference or his?" The deliberate change of subject was unmistakable, but Tina allowed it. "Mine was photography, actually. I have a good eye for composition and light. But father insisted art was a hobby, not a career, at least for a Tobin heir. And you accepted that?" There was genuine curiosity in his question, not judgment. "At the time," she admitted, "after my mother died when I was 16, pleasing him became important, perhaps too important." "So you buried your passion to become what he wanted," Chris observed, studying her with uncomfortable perceptiveness. "Tell me, how's that working out for you?" The bluntness of the question should have offended her, but instead, Tina found herself answering with unexpected honesty. Until I found my fiancé with my cousin on what should have been the happiest night of my life, I'd say the results are decidedly mixed. Chris's laugh, a rich, surprisingly warm sound, startled both of them. Fair enough, he conceded, raising his coffee cup in a toast to her candor, to mixed results and new beginnings. Something about his easy acceptance of her sarcasm, his refusal to offer platitudes or awkward sympathy, loosened a knot inside Tina's chest. She found herself returning his smile, lifting her own cup to complete the toast. To new beginnings. Their peaceful morning was interrupted by Mrs. Chen, appearing with a tablet in hand, her usually serene expression troubled. "Mr. Luke, Miss Tobin, I thought you should see this immediately." The screen displayed the New York Times website with a headline that made Tina's stomach drop. Tobin Heiress flees engagement, gala, mental health, crisis, or cold feet. Beneath was a photo of her from the previous evening, radiant in her now ruined gown, alongside a candid shot of Marcus, looking appropriately devastated as he spoke to reporters. The article quoted sources close to the family, suggesting she had been struggling with emotional issues for months. "They're controlling the narrative," Tina whispered, a familiar coldness settling in her stomach, "making me look unstable, so my decision seems less credible." "They're protecting their investment," Chris corrected, his voice hardening as he scanned the article. "Marcus Henderson's family has significant political connections that would benefit your father's media ventures. Your defection threatens that alliance." Tina looked up, startled by his detailed knowledge of her family's business arrangements. "How do you know about the Henderson connection?" A shadow crossed Chris's face. "The business world is small at certain levels. Julian Tobin's strategic marriages, both his own and those he arranges, are well known among his competitors." "Is that what I am to you? Intel on a competitor?" The question emerged before she could censor it, vulnerability making her voice sharper than intended. Chris set down the tablet, his expression suddenly fierce. "If I viewed you as a business asset, Tina, you'd still be asleep in my guest room while I arranged a press conference to showcase my rescue of Julian Tobin's distressed daughter." His voice dropped lower, intense rather than loud. "That would be the move if this were about business. Instead, I'm offering you sanctuary away from the cameras and speculation." The unvarnished truth of his statement silenced her momentary suspicion. "Your phone and identification are still at your family estate?" he continued, his tone shifting to something more practical. Tina nodded. "Everything. I quite literally ran with nothing but the clothes on my back." "Which means they can track your phone's last location but not your current whereabouts." Chris's mind was clearly working through scenarios. "Do you want to go back?" The question hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than its simple words suggested. Tina considered what awaited her. Her father's disapproval, Marcus's false contrition, the scrutiny of New York society, and the suffocating expectations that had been slowly killing her spirit for years. "No," she said, surprised by the certainty in her voice. "Not yet. I need time to think, to decide what I want outside of what's expected of me." Something like approval flickered in Chris's eyes. "In that case, I have a proposition for you." He set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. "I own a private property on the coast, secluded, secure, with no staff except a groundskeeper who lives separately on the property. You could stay there, take the time you need without media, harassment until you decide your next move." Tina stared at him, searching for ulterior motives. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because you're not a stranger anymore," Chris replied, holding her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're a woman at a crossroads I recognize all too well." "What crossroads is that?" she asked softly. "The one where you either Surrender to the life others have scripted for you, or find the courage to write your own story. His voice took on a resonance that suggested personal experience. 18 years ago, I faced that exact choice. Continue as the protégé of a powerful man who saw me as a tool rather than a person, or risk everything to create something authentic on my own terms. The confession, so unexpected and personal, stripped away the last of Tina's hesitation. In less than a day, this enigmatic man had shown her more genuine understanding than people she'd known her entire life. "I accept," she said, her own voice strengthening with each word, on one condition, which is that you'll visit. I'd like to know more about the choice you made 18 years ago and the man it created. Chris's expression remained unreadable, but something shifted in his eyes, a door opening or perhaps a wall beginning to crumble. "I think that can be arranged," he said, and for the first time since she'd met him, a genuine smile transformed his face, creating a dimple in his right cheek that made him look suddenly disarmingly human. Tina's heart performed a complicated maneuver in her chest, a sensation both terrifying and exhilarating. In the wreckage of what was supposed to be her engagement celebration, something unexpected was taking root, something that felt dangerously like the beginning of her real life. Chapter 4: Coastal Sanctuary. The helicopter descended toward what appeared to be an untouched stretch of coastline, the late afternoon sun turning the ocean to molten gold beneath them. Tina pressed her hand against the window, mesmerized by the dramatic landscape unfolding below, rugged cliffs rising from churning waters, wild forests stretching inland, and a pristine isolation that seemed to exist outside of time. "It's breathtaking," she said, her voice carrying a note of genuine wonder through the headset microphone. Chris, seated beside her, nodded with quiet pride. 500 acres of protected wilderness. The house is built into the cliffside to minimize environmental impact. The helicopter banked slightly, revealing a structure that seemed to emerge organically from the rocky terrain, glass, stone, and weathered wood, merging seamlessly with the natural environment. Unlike the imposing grandeur of his Manhattan mansion, this home invited rather than intimidated, its lines flowing with the contours of the cliff. "You designed it," Tina said with sudden certainty, recognizing something distinctly his in the balanced proportions and thoughtful integration with nature. Chris turned to her sharply. "How did you know?" "It feels like you," she answered simply. Strong but not imposing, complex yet harmonious, with nothing superfluous. Something shifted in his expression, surprise followed by a fleeting vulnerability that made her heart beat faster. The moment was interrupted by the pilot announcing their landing, and soon they were touching down on a small helipad positioned a discreet distance from the main house. The caretaker, introduced only as Jensen, met them with a vintage Land Rover. His weathered face spoke of decades outdoors, and the quiet efficiency with which he handled their luggage suggested military training. He acknowledged Tina with a respectful nod, but offered no excessive welcomes or questions about her presence. "Everything's prepared as requested, sir," Jensen said as they loaded the last bag. "Pantry and refrigerator stocked, security system updated. Margaret sent along some of her sourdough bread and that wild blackberry jam you might enjoy, Miss Tobin. Thank you, Jensen. We won't need anything else today." Chris's tone was friendly but decisive. Jensen nodded and retreated to a smaller residence partially hidden among pine trees in the distance. "Jensen and Margaret have been with me since I built this place," Chris explained as they drove the winding path to the main house. "They're private people themselves, unlikely to mention your presence to anyone. You trust them," Tina observed, watching how the tension that had subtly held Chris's shoulders during their journey had begun to ease the moment they'd landed. "With my life," Chris confirmed, navigating the vehicle around a curve that revealed a stunning ocean vista. They helped me when I had nothing but ambition and too many bad memories. Their discretion is absolute. The house, up close, was even more remarkable than it had appeared from the air. Nestled into the rocky cliff face, its multiple levels cascaded down toward the ocean, with expansive glass walls capturing the dramatic seascape, while stone elements anchored it to the rugged terrain. Gardens of native plants softened the transition between architecture and wilderness, creating natural privacy screens and windbreaks. "Home, sweet temporary home," Chris said, carrying Tina's bags into a soaring great room where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the ocean like living art. A massive fireplace crafted from local stone anchored one wall, while comfortable yet elegant. Furnishings invited relaxation rather than formality. "This is extraordinary," Tina breathed, moving toward the windows. Below, a series of decks and terraces stepped down the cliff face, culminating in a private cove where waves crashed against dark rocks and a small strip of pristine sand. "The master suite is through there," Chris indicated a hallway to the right. "It has the best view, especially at sunrise. There are 3 guest rooms down the opposite hall if you'd prefer." "Are you staying?" Tina asked, realizing they hadn't clarified this detail in their hasty departure from New York. "Just tonight to ensure you're settled." Something in his tone had shifted, becoming more formal. "I have business matters requiring my attention in the city tomorrow." Disappointment curled through her chest, surprising in its intensity. "Of course, you've already been more than generous with your time." Tina. The way he said her name made her turn to face him fully. "I'm not abandoning you here. I'll return in a few days, as we discussed. This place is yours to use as sanctuary, for as long as you need." The sincerity in his eyes eased her irrational fear. "Thank you. I'm not usually so dependent. This situation has me off balance. Understandably so." Chris moved to the large open kitchen, where he began unloading groceries from insulated bags. "Would you like a tour after we put these away? Or would you prefer to settle into your room first?" They fell into a surprisingly comfortable domestic rhythm, arranging provisions in the state-of-the-art kitchen while discussing the sustainable features of the house. Chris explained the geothermal heating system, solar arrays, and rainwater collection with the enthusiasm of someone genuinely passionate about the technology rather than simply showing off expensive toys. Later, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they walked the property's winding paths. Chris pointed out his favorite reading spots, a hidden meditation garden, and the trail leading down to the private beach. The easy conversation of the morning continued, punctuated by comfortable silences that felt neither awkward nor empty. "You'll need to show respect for the ocean here," Chris cautioned, as they stood on a deck overlooking the cove. "The currents can be treacherous, especially around those rocks to the north." "I'm a strong swimmer," Tina said, watching the hypnotic rhythm of waves breaking against dark stone. "My mother insisted on Olympic-level training in case I ever needed to escape paparazzi on a yacht." The memory brought a bittersweet smile. She was the practical one in the family. "Was?" Chris asked gently. "She died when I was 16, pancreatic cancer." Tina kept her eyes on the horizon. "It was quick, only 3 months from diagnosis to funeral. My father threw himself into expanding the business afterward. I think work was easier than grief. And you?" "I became what was expected of me." The admission felt weightier spoken aloud on this cliff edge, with nothing but truth. Between her and the endless ocean, the perfect daughter, the flawless heiress, the ideal partner for strategic alliances. She turned to face him. "Until last night, when I finally couldn't do it anymore." Chris studied her face with an intensity that might have made her uncomfortable. "From anyone else? What would you be if you could choose freely, without expectation or obligation?" The question hit her like a physical force. No one had ever asked her that before. Not her father, not her friends, not Marcus. Tears sprang unexpectedly to her eyes. "I don't know," she whispered. "Isn't that terrible? I'm 28 years old, and I have no idea who I am outside of being Julian Tobin's daughter." Instead of offering platitudes, Chris simply nodded. Then perhaps that's what this time is for. Discovery. The simplicity and understanding in his response loosened something tight in Tina's chest. A single tear escaped, trailing down her cheek. Without thinking, Chris reached out, his thumb gently brushing away the moisture. The contact was brief but electric, sending a current through both of them that momentarily suspended time. His hand lingered near her face, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel its warmth. "I should start dinner," he said, his voice rougher than before. "The sunset is spectacular from the western terrace. You might want your camera." As he turned to leave, Tina caught his wrist. "What about you, Chris? Did you discover who you really were when you made your choice? 18 years ago." He looked down at her hand on his skin, then back to her eyes. "I discovered who I wasn't," he said finally. "The rest has been a work in progress." The intensity between them had shifted into something deeper than physical attraction, a recognition of shared wounds, carefully hidden beneath polished exteriors. For a suspended moment, Tina thought he might kiss her, and was surprised by how desperately she wanted him to. Instead, Chris gently disengaged his wrist from her grasp. "Take your time out here. I'll be in the kitchen when you're ready." Alone with the wind and waves, Tina tried to process the complex emotions this enigmatic man evoked in her. In less than 48 hours, Chris Luke had shown her more genuine understanding than people she'd known all her life. There was something both comforting and terrifying in being truly seen after a lifetime of performing to expectations. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink. Tina found herself wishing for her camera. Not the latest model phone she'd left behind, but the professional-grade equipment she'd once been passionate about before her father deemed photography an impractical hobby. When she finally returned to the house, she found Chris in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up as he worked on dinner preparation. The domestic scene struck her with unexpected force. This powerful man who commanded a tech empire and owned priceless art, chopping vegetables with the same focused precision he probably applied to business acquisitions. "Can I help?" she asked, moving to wash her hands at the sink. "You can open the wine." He nodded toward a bottle breathing on the counter. "And tell me if that pasta sauce needs more basil." They worked together in easy synchronicity, as though they'd done this countless times before. Chris moved with economical grace in the kitchen, his actions confident without being showy. When their hands occasionally brushed, reaching for utensils or ingredients, Tina felt that same electric awareness, but neither acknowledged it directly. By the time they carried their plates to the western terrace, the sky had transformed into a canvas of deep purples and fiery crimsons reflected on the ocean surface. They ate by the light of artfully placed lanterns, the conversation flowing as easily as the exceptional wine Chris had selected. "You never talk about your family," Tina observed as they finished the meal. "Are they still living?" A shadow crossed Chris's face. "My parents died when I was 7. Car accident. I'm so sorry." Tina's heart ached for the child he had been. "Who raised you?" "The foster system, primarily." His tone remained neutral, but his knuckles whitened around his wineglass. "It was educational." Something in his carefully controlled expression told Tina not to press further. Instead, she asked, "And was there someone who helped you when you made your choice at 18? Someone who offered sanctuary when you needed it?" The question seemed to surprise him. After a moment's consideration, he nodded. "One person, an art teacher who recognized something in me worth salvaging." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He said I had the hands of a creator trapped in the circumstances of destruction. He was right, Tina said softly. I've seen your hands. They're definitely those of a creator. Chris looked at her then, really looked, with an intensity that seemed to peer directly into her soul. The air between them thickened with unspoken possibilities. It's getting late, he said finally, breaking the spell. And you've had an overwhelming couple of days. They cleared the dishes together in comfortable silence. At the hallway leading to their respective bedrooms, they paused, suddenly awkward for the first time since their initial meeting. Thank you, Tina said simply. Not just for dinner or this incredible place, but for seeing me. The real me, not the heiress or the socialite or the dutiful daughter. In the soft lighting of the hallway, Chris's expression softened in a way she hadn't seen before. Thank you for being worth seeing. The words, spoken with such quiet sincerity, made her breath catch. Acting on impulse rather than calculation for perhaps the first time in her adult life, Tina rose on her tiptoes and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. His skin was warm against her lips, the slight roughness of evening stubble a sensual contrast. As she pulled back, their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to crackle with possibility. Chris remained perfectly still, his breathing slightly uneven. "Good night, Chris," she whispered, stepping away before she could do something reckless like press her body against his and discover if his mouth tasted as good as it looked. "Good night, Tina," he replied, his voice deeper than usual. "Sleep well." In her room, with its spectacular ocean view and luxurious furnishings, Tina lay awake long into the night, replaying every moment, every look, every almost touch between them. Something profound was happening, something that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, she felt fully alive. Whatever came next, she knew with absolute certainty that there would be no returning to the carefully scripted existence she had fled, that life was already becoming a distant memory, fading like footprints on sand as the tide of transformation rose within her. Chapter 5. Veils Lifting. Morning light filtered through floor to ceiling, windows painting iridescent patterns across the bed where Tina slowly awakened. For a moment, she lay still, absorbing the rhythmic sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below and the unfamiliar sense of peace that had settled over her. 3 days had passed since she'd arrived at Chris's coastal sanctuary, and already her previous life felt like a distant dream. She stretched languidly, anticipation warming her blood at the thought of seeing Chris at breakfast. But when she padded into the kitchen, she found only a handwritten note propped against a French press filled with coffee. Tina had to return to New York earlier than expected. Business matter requires immediate attention. Make yourself at home. I'll call when I can. Jensen and Margaret are available if you need anything. Disappointment washed through her with surprising intensity. She'd grown accustomed to their morning conversations over coffee, the way Chris listened when she spoke, as though each word mattered, the subtle shifts in his expression that revealed more than his carefully measured statements. Pouring coffee into a mug, she carried it to the terrace, overlooking the ocean. The day stretched before her, empty of obligations or expectations for perhaps the first time in her adult life. The freedom was both exhilarating and intimidating. After breakfast, she explored parts of the property she hadn't yet seen. A winding path led her to a small structure nestled among wind-sculpted pines, a glass-walled yoga studio equipped with every amenity imaginable. Another trail revealed a natural freshwater pool fed by a mountain spring, the crystal-clear water, invitingly cool in the midday sun. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Tina found herself drawn to a building she'd noticed from a distance but hadn't investigated. a weathered barn-like structure situated some distance from the main house. Curiosity piqued. She made her way along the path, enjoying the wild coastal flowers that dotted the landscape. The building's rough exterior gave no hint of its purpose. Finding the door unlocked, Tina hesitated only briefly before stepping inside. What she discovered stole her breath. Sunlight streamed through skylights, illuminating what could only be described as an artist's sanctuary. One section held a woodworking studio with tools arranged with military precision. Another area featured a potter's wheel and kiln. But it was the painting studio that dominated the space. Easels of various sizes, shelves of pigments and brushes, and most strikingly, walls covered with artwork. Tina moved slowly through the space, heart pounding as she studied each piece. Landscapes captured the raw power of the coastal terrain in bold, confident strokes. Figure studies revealed a profound understanding of human anatomy and emotion. But most arresting were the portraits. Faces emerged from darkness with such visceral intensity that they seemed about to speak. He never shows these to anyone. Tina whirled around to find Jensen standing in the doorway, his weathered face unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "The door was open and I was curious. I should have asked first." Jensen shook his head. "If he didn't want you to find it, it would have been locked." He moved further into the space, looking around with evident familiarity. "Been caretaking for Mr. Luke for 15 years. Never once seen him bring a guest to the studio." The implication hung in the air between them. "These are extraordinary," Tina said softly, gesturing to the artwork. "He told me he sketched occasionally, but this started with charcoal drawings when he first came here," Jensen offered, surprising her with his willingness to share. "Just a kid with too much pain in his eyes, said this land spoke to him." He ran a calloused hand along a workbench. "Bought this property with his first big success. Most young men would have bought sports cars or penthouses. He built this studio before the main house was even designed." Tina's eyes were drawn to a painting partially covered by a cloth. Something about the visible corner seemed different from the others. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward it. Jensen hesitated, then nodded. "Suppose, if you're here, it means something." Carefully, Tina lifted the cloth to reveal a portrait unlike the others. While most of Chris's paintings bore the mark of technical mastery and emotional depth, this one radiated something more, a raw, almost painful vulnerability. It showed a young boy, perhaps 7 or 8, standing in front of a burning car, his expression a haunting mixture of shock and devastation. Though rendered in paint, the image had the immediacy of a witness statement. "His parents," Jensen said quietly. "The accident." Tina's heart constricted. "He was there? Walked away without a scratch? Physically, anyway." Jensen's voice held. Decades of unspoken meaning. "Some wounds don't heal clean. Does he ever talk about it?" she asked, unable to tear her eyes from the portrait. "Not to me. Not to anyone that I know of." Jensen moved toward the door. "Margaret's making a clam chowder tonight. Said to tell you dinner's at 7 if you're interested." After he left, Tina remained in the studio, absorbing the presence of the real Chris Luke, not the billionaire tech mogul or the reserved host, but the man who poured his soul onto canvas when no one was watching. Each piece revealed another layer of him, another facet of the complex, wounded, extraordinary person he kept hidden from the world. On an impulse, she picked up a sketchbook left open on a workbench. The drawing showed a woman's eyes, her eyes, rendered with such intimate detail that it stole her breath. The date in the corner was from yesterday morning, before he'd left. He saw her, really saw her. When her phone rang hours later, she was still in the studio, surrounded by fragments of Chris's soul captured in pigment and charcoal. "I see you found my guilty secret," he said without preamble when she answered. Tina smiled, somehow unsurprised he knew. "Security cameras?" Jensen texted. He's protective of my privacy, as he should be. She traced the edge of the sketchbook. Why didn't you tell me? About the art. A pause. Would you have believed that the tech billionaire who builds security systems spends his nights painting portraits in a converted barn? I might have, she countered. After all, I believed the society heiress could have a genuine passion for photography. His low chuckle warmed her even through the digital connection. Touché, but it's not something I share. Yet you left it unlocked. Another pause, longer this time. Perhaps I wanted you to know. The admission, so simple yet profound, made her heart race. These aren't just sketches, Chris. This is extraordinary work. It's therapy, he corrected, his voice taking on an edge. Not for public consumption. Not. Everything valuable belongs in public, Tina replied softly. Some things are too sacred for display. The silence that followed held a weight she hadn't expected. Finally, he asked, "When did you become so wise?" About the same time I started running through thunderstorms in designer gowns, she answered, drawing another of those rare laughs from him. I miss you, he said abruptly, the words seeming to surprise him as much as her. The simple honesty of his statement caught her completely off guard. You do? More than is reasonable for someone. I've known such a short time. His voice had dropped lower, more intimate. I keep catching myself turning to tell you something, only to remember you're not here. When are you coming back? She asked, her own voice softer than she'd intended. Tomorrow afternoon, if all goes as planned. He sounded weary. The business matter is complicated. Is everything okay? It will be. The confidence in his tone reassured her. Tina, yes? I'm glad you found the studio. The words carried layers of meaning she was only beginning to understand. After they disconnected, Tina spent the evening with Jensen and Margaret in their cozy cottage. The elderly couple's obvious affection for Chris and their cautious warming toward her provided glimpses into parts of him she hadn't yet seen. Margaret shared stories of teaching Chris to bake bread when he was nothing but skin and bones and nightmares, while Jensen described teaching him to fish and build with his hands. Never seen anyone pick up skills so fast, Jensen remarked, pride evident in his voice. Boy could watch something once and then do it like he'd been practicing for years. The foster homes weren't kind to him, Margaret added, her weathered face softening with old sorrow. Said he'd never had his own room before he came here. Used to sleep on the floor for the first few months. Said the bed was too soft. How did he end up here? Tina asked, accepting a second serving of Margaret's remarkable clam chowder. Showed up one stormy night, Jensen replied, exchanging a glance with his wife. Soaking wet like you, but half-starved and carrying everything. He owned in one backpack. We had the land then, Margaret explained, but medical bills were eating us alive. Cancer, my first bout. Couldn't keep up with the mortgage. Chris offered to work in exchange for a place in the barn, Jensen continued. Said he needed to disappear for a while. Had that look, hunted but determined. Like an animal that's been caged too long, but hasn't forgotten how to be wild, Margaret added softly. We weren't fools. Knew he was running from something. But some people run toward better things, not just away from bad ones. Tina listened, absorbing these pieces of Chris's past, building a more complete picture of the man who had become so unexpectedly central to her thoughts. By the time she returned to the main house, stars blanketed the sky, their reflection dancing on the dark ocean surface. Unable to sleep, she wandered to the great room where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the moonlit seascape. Lost in thought, she didn't hear Chris arrive until his voice came from behind her. You're still awake. Tina turned, her breath catching at the sight of him. He looked exhausted, his customary polished appearance slightly rumpled, eyes shadowed with fatigue. Without thinking, she moved toward him. You look like you've been through a war. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Corporate terrorism, almost as brutal. "Are you hungry? I can heat up some of Margaret's chowder." Chris shook his head. "I just needed—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "I wanted to see you." The simple honesty of his statement swept away any remaining pretense between them. Tina closed the distance, wrapping her arms around him in an embrace that felt simultaneously foreign and inevitable. For a moment he remained still, as though unused to such contact. Then his arms came around her, pulling her against his chest with a quiet intensity that took her breath away. They stood like that, neither speaking, his heartbeat strong and steady. Against her cheek, Tina could feel something shifting between them, walls crumbling that had been erected long before they'd met. "I'm sorry I left without saying goodbye," he murmured against her hair. "You're here now," she replied, pulling back. "Just enough to look up at him. That's what matters." His eyes, those remarkable eyes that shifted between blue and grey, depending on the light, searched hers with an intensity that made her heart race. One hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing lightly across her skin. "I don't do this," he said softly, the words seeming torn from somewhere deep inside him. "I don't let people in." "Neither do I," she admitted. "Not really." "Then what the hell are we doing? Breaking the patterns that have kept us safe but alone," she whispered, taking the risk of being seen completely. The kiss, when it finally came, felt like coming home to a place she'd never been before. His lips were gentle at first, almost hesitant, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But when she responded, pressing closer and sliding her hands into his hair, something broke loose in him. The kiss deepened, became hungry, desperate, as though he'd been starving for her without realizing it. Tina felt herself melting against him, every nerve ending alive with sensation. His hands traced the curve of her spine, pulling her more firmly against him until she could feel the hard planes of his body through the thin fabric of her dress. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily, gazes locked in stunned recognition of the power surging between them. "Stay with me. Tonight," she whispered, resting her forehead against his. "Just to sleep. You look exhausted." Vulnerability flickered across his face. This powerful man who controlled corporate empires but couldn't control whatever was happening between them. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. In her bedroom, their movements took on a reverent quality. Chris removed his shoes and jacket, then stretched out on the bed beside her, fully clothed. Tina curled against him, her head finding that perfect hollow between his shoulder and chest, as though their bodies had been designed to fit together. "Tell me something true," she murmured into the darkness. "Something you've never told anyone else." His chest rose and fell beneath her cheek as he took a deep breath. "I've never brought anyone here before. Not to this house." The admission wrapped around her heart. "Why me?" Chris's arm tightened around her, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Because from the moment you stumbled into my library, soaking wet and defiant, I recognized something in you that I thought existed only in me." "What was that?" "Loneliness disguised as self-sufficiency." His fingers traced patterns on her arm. "The exhaustion of performing a role rather than living a life." The words struck her with their accuracy. "How do you see me so clearly when we've known each other such a short time? Perhaps we've been looking for each other without knowing it." His voice held a note of wonder, as though he'd surprised himself with the thought. Tina lifted her head to study his face in the moonlight streaming through the windows. "I saw your painting," she said softly. "The one of the accident." Pain flickered across his features, quickly masked. "I should have put it away." "No," she said firmly. "Don't hide from me, Chris. Not that, not anything." For a long moment he was silent, and Tina feared she'd pushed too far, too fast. Then he began to speak, his voice low and measured, as though selecting each word with care. I was in the back seat. We were coming home from my piano recital. I'd played Beethoven's Für Elise, not particularly well, but my parents were proud. He swallowed hard. A truck driver fell asleep at the wheel, crossed the center line. The impact was catastrophic. My mother died instantly. My father lived long enough to pull me from the wreckage before the fire reached the fuel tank. Tina felt tears prick her eyes. "Oh, Chris." The last thing he said to me was, "Run, Christopher." So I did. His voice had taken on a distant quality. I ran until I couldn't anymore, then watched from a distance as emergency vehicles arrived, too late for anything but recovery. She pressed her lips to his shoulder, offering wordless comfort. 7 foster homes in 11 years after that, he continued. Some merely indifferent, others actively cruel. I learned to be invisible when necessary and invaluable when possible. Survival mechanisms. And at 18, the choice you mentioned, I developed a security algorithm that caught the attention of several tech companies. Had offers for full scholarships to prestigious universities, provided I signed exclusive development rights to my work. His fingers continued their gentle tracing on her arm. One night I packed what little I owned and disappeared, used the last of my savings to buy a bus ticket to the coast, determined to find my own way without compromises. That's when you met Jensen and Margaret? They owned this land then, struggling to keep it after medical bills had drained their savings. I worked for them in exchange for a place to sleep in their barn. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Margaret insisted on feeding me, despite their circumstances, said I was nothing but bones and sadness. She taught me that kindness isn't always a transaction. Tina's heart ached for the wounded boy he'd been. How did you go from sleeping in a barn to building a tech empire? I continued developing my security systems, found ethical clients who paid fairly for my work, lived on nothing, saved everything. His voice took on a note of fierce pride. When I had enough, I bought this land from Jensen and Margaret with the condition that they remain as caretakers. Built my first company from a laptop in that barn while learning to paint from an art teacher in the nearby town. The one who said you had the hands of a creator trapped in the circumstances of destruction. Tina remembered. You have an excellent memory. His fingertips traced the curve of her jawline. Robert Sullivan. He'd been a prominent artist in New York before moving to our little coastal town to battle his demons in private. He saw something in me worth salvaging, as you saw something in me worth sheltering, she whispered. Chris's eyes held hers in the darkness. You were never broken, Tina, just contained in too small a space. The tenderness in his voice undid her final defenses. She kissed him then, pouring everything she couldn't yet say into the contact, gratitude, understanding, and something deeper that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. When they parted, Chris tucked her head back against his chest, his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her ear. Sleep, he murmured. I'll be here in the morning. As Tina drifted toward sleep, wrapped in the warmth of his embrace, she felt something shift within her, as though puzzle pieces long misaligned had finally found their proper configuration. For the first time in memory, she felt no need to perform or present a carefully curated version of herself. With Chris, she could simply be. Unknown to both of them, far away in New York, Julian Tobin scowled at a private investigator's report confirming his daughter's location. Beside him, Marcus Henderson's handsome face twisted with calculation as he studied the grainy surveillance photo showing Tina and Chris walking the coastal property. Well, Julian said coldly, it seems my daughter has found herself a new protector. How convenient for Luke that she's the key to what he's been trying to acquire for years. What's our next move? Marcus asked, ambition glittering in his eyes. Julian's smile never reached his eyes. We retrieve what's ours, of course, both the girl and the company. Chapter 6. Hidden Truths Revealed. Morning sunlight spilled across tangled sheets, warming Tina's skin as she slowly awakened. The bed beside her was empty, but the pillow still held the impression of Chris's head, and his scent lingered on the sheets. For a moment, she simply lay there, absorbing the memory of falling asleep in his arms, the solid strength of his body against hers, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear. The night had been a revelation, not of physical intimacy, but of emotional connection. Chris had shared pieces of himself he'd kept hidden for decades, dismantling walls that had protected him since childhood. The trust implicit in those revelations humbled her. The aroma of fresh coffee drifted through the open doorway, drawing her from bed. Wrapping herself in a silk robe, she padded barefoot through the house, following the scent. To the kitchen. There she found Chris, his back to her as he worked at the stove, dressed casually in worn jeans and a simple grey t-shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. "Good morning," she said softly. Chris turned, his expression softening at the sight of her. "Good morning?" Something had shifted between them overnight, a new ease, a comfortable intimacy that required no words. He poured coffee into a waiting mug and handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers in a touch that felt deliberately prolonged. "Sleep well?" he asked, returning his attention to the stove where he was preparing French toast. "Better than I have." "In years," she admitted. "You?" "Same." The simple word carried weight. "Though I'm not used to sharing a bed." "Neither am I," Tina said, surprising herself with the confession. At his raised eyebrow, she clarified, "I mean, obviously I've had relationships, but I've never actually slept through the night with someone. I always found an excuse to leave, or have them leave." "Why is that, do you think?" Chris asked, sliding a perfectly caramelized slice of French toast onto a plate. Tina considered the question as she added berries from a bowl on the counter. "Vulnerability, I suppose. Sleep is when we're most defenseless." "Yet you asked me to stay." "Yet I asked you to stay," she echoed softly, meeting his gaze. They ate breakfast on the terrace, the conversation flowing easily between them. Chris described the business emergency that had called him back to New York, a potential security breach in one of his company's client systems that had required his personal attention. "Crisis averted?" Tina asked. "For now." Something in his tone suggested the matter wasn't entirely resolved, but he changed the subject before she could inquire further. "I thought we might take the boat out today, if you're interested. There's a private cove about an hour down the coastline that's accessible only by water." The day unfolded in a series of perfect moments. Chris proved to be as skilled a sailor as he was at everything else, handling the sleek yacht with confident ease. They anchored in a sheltered cove, surrounded by towering cliffs, where crystal-clear water revealed vibrant marine life below. They swam, picnicked on the small stretch of pristine sand, and talked for hours about everything and nothing, favorite books, childhood dreams, those that existed before tragedy altered Chris's path, travel destinations they longed to visit. When the conversation turned to Tina's photography passion, Chris listened with genuine interest, rather than the polite tolerance she'd encountered from others in her life. "I'd like to see your work sometime," he said as they lay side by side on a blanket, the afternoon sun warming their skin. "It's been years since I took any photographs worth seeing," Tina admitted. "My father considered it a distraction from more practical pursuits." Chris turned his head to study her profile. "What drew you to photography originally?" The question made her smile. "The ability to capture truth in a single frame, to freeze a moment of authentic emotion or beauty before it disappeared." She traced patterns in the sand beside the blanket, There's honesty in a well-composed photograph, something that cuts through pretense. Like your eyes, Chris said unexpectedly. Tina turned to face him, startled by the observation. What do you mean? Your eyes never lie, even when your words are socially correct. His gaze held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. It's what I noticed first about you. That night in my library. Your eyes told a different story than your composed apology. And what story did they tell? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That you were terrified but determined, breaking free but unsure where to land. His hand moved to cup her cheek, thumb brushing lightly across her skin. Beautiful and authentic in your vulnerability. The tenderness in his voice, the gentle touch of his hand, it undid her. Tina leaned forward, closing the distance between them with a kiss that began soft but quickly deepened as Chris responded with surprising intensity. His arms encircled her, pulling her against the solid warmth of his body as the kiss transformed into something hungry and desperate. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Chris rested his forehead against hers. We should head. Back before the tide changes, he said, his voice rough with restrained desire. The return journey passed in a haze of anticipation, an electric awareness charging the air between them. They barely spoke, communicating instead through lingering glances and deliberate touches that promised more to come. As Chris guided the yacht into its berth, Tina's phone buzzed with an incoming call, the first since she'd arrived at the sanctuary. The screen displayed her assistant's name, reality intruding on their perfect day. I should take this, she said apologetically. Zoe wouldn't call unless it was important. Chris nodded, focusing on securing the boat as Tina stepped away to answer. Zoe, what's wrong? She asked without preamble. Tina, thank God. Are you okay? Her assistant's voice vibrated with concern. Everyone's been looking for you for days. Your father has private investigators combing the country, and Marcus is giving tearful interviews about your emotional fragility to anyone who'll listen. Anger flashed through Tina at the manipulation. I'm perfectly fine. Just needed some space. Well, space is about to get scarce. Your father's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. He's claiming temporary control of your voting shares under the mental incapacity clause in the family trust. He what? Tina's voice rose, sharply drawing Chris's attention. He can't do that. He can if he has a psychiatrist willing to sign an assessment, which apparently he does. Zoe lowered her voice. And Tina, there's more. The board is voting on a merger proposal. The rumor is it's Luke Industries making the offer. Ice spread through Tina's veins as her eyes met Chris's concerned gaze across the dock. I have to go, she said numbly. Thank you for the warning. As she ended the call, Chris approached, his expression questioning. Bad news. You could say that. Tina struggled to keep her voice steady. My father is trying to declare me mentally incompetent to seize control of my voting shares in Tobin Media. Alarm flashed across Chris's face. He can't do that. Apparently, he can, with the right medical opinion in his pocket. She took a steadying breath. He's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow to vote on a merger offer. She paused, studying his face carefully. From Luke Industries. The color drained from Chris's face, his expression freezing into an unreadable mask. Tina, is it true? She interrupted, needing to hear it directly from him. A muscle worked in his jaw as he visibly struggled with his response. Yes, but it's not what you think. The confirmation hit her like a physical blow. So, while I've been here falling in, she caught herself. While I've been here, you've been planning to take over my family's company. The negotiations began months ago, long before we met, Chris said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. And it's not a hostile takeover. Your father approached us initially. Hurt and confusion warred within her. Why wouldn't you tell me? I assumed you knew, he said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. You sit on the board. My father has always controlled what information reaches me, Tina said bitterly. Clearly, he didn't consider this worth mentioning. She turned away, needing distance to process this revelation. Was their entire connection simply a calculated business? Move on Chris's part. Had he merely been keeping her distracted while the deal progressed? I need to go back to New York, she said, her voice hollow. I need to see these documents for myself. Tina, wait. Chris caught her arm gently. There's something you need to see first. Something I've been working on that explains everything. Against, her better judgment, she followed him to his office in the east wing of the house. There, he unlocked a drawer and removed a thick folder labeled Renaissance Rising. What is this? She asked, accepting it reluctantly. The real reason I've been interested in Tobin Media. He opened the folder, revealing detailed plans for a non-profit arts education initiative. This is what I've been building for the past decade, anonymously. As Tina flipped through the pages, understanding slowly dawned. Financial statements showed millions channeled into arts programs in underserved communities. Photographs documented transformational programs in areas devastated by poverty. Letters from children whose lives had been changed filled another section. Art saved me when nothing else could, Chris said quietly. I've been trying to pass that lifeline to others who need it. This is incredible, Tina whispered, genuinely moved. But what does it have to do with Tobin Media? The final phase requires a media partner to amplify impact, to tell these stories, to change public perception about the importance of arts education. His eyes held hers intently. Your father's company has the platform and reach I need. And you couldn't just approach us as a non-profit partner? I tried. A shadow crossed his face. 3 times over the past 2 years. Your father rejected every proposal. He said there was no monetary value in arts education stories. The words rang true to her father's mercenary worldview. So you decided to buy the company instead? I decided to create a partnership that would benefit everyone involved. He gestured to another section of the portfolio. The acquisition includes provisions protecting every current employee, maintaining editorial independence, and establishing a separate foundation to oversee arts education initiatives. Tina felt torn between wanting to believe him and the hurt of discovering such a significant connection to her family business, only by accident. Why keep your involvement with the foundation secret all these years? Because I needed to know. It could succeed on its merits, not because of my name or money. His voice softened. The same reason you must be exhausted being seen as the Tobin heiress rather than as Tina. The parallel struck home. She understood the desire to create something untainted by expectation or family legacy. I need to return to New York, she said finally. I need to see the acquisition documents, understand what my father is really planning. I'll come with you, Chris offered immediately. No, she shook her head firmly. I need to do this alone. I need to know who I am and what I want outside of anyone else's influence, yours included. Pain flickered across his face, but he nodded. I understand. The helicopter can be ready within the hour. As Tina packed her belongings, emotions tumbled chaotically within her. The Arts Foundation was clearly genuine, the passion project of a man who understood firsthand how creativity could heal broken spirits. Yet the timing and circumstances of their meeting remained troublingly convenient. Before she left, Chris handed her a small package. When you're ready, open this, he said, his voice rough with restrained emotion. No matter what you decide about us, know that everything that happened here was real for me. The helicopter lifted off as sunset painted the coastline in gold and amber. Tina watched the sanctuary grow smaller beneath her, the man standing on the cliff's edge, becoming an indistinguishable figure and then disappearing altogether as they banked toward New York. She held the unopened package in her lap, torn between the desire to rip it open immediately and the fear of what she might discover. Finally, as the coastline receded behind them, she carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a hand-carved wooden box. When she lifted the lid, she found a camera. Not just any camera, but a rare vintage Leica that professional photographers coveted. Tucked beside it was a simple card in Chris's distinctive handwriting. For capturing truth in a single frame. Whatever you decide, don't forget to see the world through your own lens. Tears spilled down her cheeks as the helicopter carried her, back toward the life she'd fled and the confrontation that awaited her there. Chapter 7. Paradise Shattered. The Tobin family penthouse felt like a museum exhibit of her former life, opulent, meticulously arranged, and utterly lifeless. Tina stood in her childhood bedroom, now transformed into a guest suite that revealed no trace of the girl she'd once been. Even her photographs, once proudly displayed on these walls, had been replaced with bland, expensive artwork selected to impress rather than inspire. Her father's voice carried from the hallway, instructing staff to inform him immediately when she arrived. Tina's fingers tightened around the vintage Leica, hanging from her neck. Chris's gift had become a talisman of sorts, reminding her of the authenticity she'd discovered at the coastal sanctuary. Slipping silently through the penthouse, she reached her father's private study undetected. The electronic lock yielded to her fingerprint. Despite his maneuvering, she remained a Tobin. Inside, she found exactly what she sought, the complete merger proposal from Luke Industries, annotated with her father's handwritten notes. What she read both relieved and troubled her. Chris had been truthful. The proposal included extensive provisions for preserving editorial independence, protecting employees, and establishing the Arts Education Foundation as a major initiative. Far from a corporate raid, it represented a thoughtful integration that would strengthen both companies while advancing humanitarian goals. Her father's notes, however, told a different story. "Strip out arts provisions," he'd scrawled in the margins. "Counter with full sale, not partnership. And most disturbingly, use T's absence to trigger incapacity clause. Seize her shares before vote." The discovery that her father had been planning to declare her mentally incompetent even before her flight from the engagement party, that it was strategy rather than reaction, sent ice through her veins. What hurt more was recognizing that he deliberately kept her ignorant of the merger discussions, despite her position on the board. Well, the prodigal daughter returns. Tina turned to find her father standing in the doorway, Marcus hovering just behind him. Julian Tobin remained as imposing as ever, impeccably dressed, silver hair perfectly styled, expression coldly calculating. But for the first time, Tina saw beyond the facade to the desperate manipulation beneath. "You've been planning to declare me incompetent for months," she said, gesturing to the documents. "Long before I left the engagement party." "A contingency." "A plan," Julian replied smoothly. "One that became necessary when you demonstrated such alarming behavior." "Alarming behavior," Tina repeated with a hollow laugh. "Is that what we're calling it, when a woman discovers her fiancé cheating and refuses to proceed with a business arrangement disguised as a marriage?" Marcus stepped forward, a complex expression crossing his face. For once, the practiced charm fell away, revealing something more genuine, perhaps regret, though whether for losing her or being caught remained unclear. "Tina, what happened at the party was inexcusable," he said, his voice lacking its usual polished confidence. "But disappearing for days, cutting off all contact, you have to understand how that looked from our perspective." "Your concern," is touching, Tina replied coldly. Almost as touching as your conspiracy with my father to have me declared mentally unfit so you could seize control of my shares. You ungrateful child, Julian snapped, his composure cracking. Everything I've done has been to protect this family's legacy, a legacy you're now threatening by consorting with Christopher Luke, of all people. Is that what this is about? Tina gestured to the merger documents. Your paranoia that someone might succeed where you failed, running a media company with actual integrity. How dare you enter my home uninvited, came a deep voice from the doorway. All three turned to find Chris standing there, his powerful frame filling the entrance, expression carefully neutral despite the tension radiating from him. Your security needs updating, Chris remarked evenly to Julian, almost as much as your negotiating tactics. Marcus moved forward, abandoning his earlier conciliatory tone for open hostility. You have no right to be here. Tina is home with her family now. Is that what you call this? Chris's gaze met Tina's, a silent question in his eyes. Are you all right? She gave a small nod, drawing strength from his presence despite her earlier insistence on handling this alone. Mr. Luke was just leaving, Julian said, his voice dangerous in its controlled fury. Unless he'd care to explain why he's been courting my daughter while simultaneously attempting to dismantle her inheritance. I've explained everything to Tina, Chris answered calmly. Unlike you, I believe in transparency with my partners. Partners? Julian's eyebrows rose. Is that what you're calling it? How charmingly euphemistic. Father, Tina interjected, her patience fraying. I've read the merger proposal. The complete version, not the sanitized summary you intended to present to me. Chris isn't trying to dismantle Tobin Media. He's offering a partnership that would preserve its legacy while expanding its reach. And you believe him? Julian asked incredulously. 1 week in his company, and you're willing to throw away generations of family control? What family control? Tina countered. You were planning to sell our archives to Monarch Media, a company sanctioned in 3 countries for privacy violations and propaganda. How does that honor our legacy? Surprise flickered across Julian's face before his mask of control returned. Business requires difficult decisions sometimes, Tina. Something you'd understand if you'd paid attention instead of playing with cameras. The dismissal stung, but Tina refused to show it. I've paid more attention than you realize, including to the financial reports you believed I wouldn't understand, the ones showing how deeply leveraged the company has become under your leadership. Julian's face flushed with anger. Christopher Luke has manipulated you, turned you against your own family for his corporate gain. Actually, Chris interjected, opening a briefcase he carried, I've been completely transparent about my motives regarding both Tobin Media and my interest in your daughter. He withdrew a flash drive and placed it on the desk. This contains documentation of all communication between Luke Industries and Tobin Media over the past 18 months, including 3 separate partnership proposals for the Renaissance Rising Foundation that you rejected. Julian's face reddened further. You're recording our private negotiations. Standard procedure for all my business dealings, Chris replied evenly, particularly when dealing with someone who has a history of reinterpreting agreements after the fact. Tina, Marcus said, his tone shifting to something more genuine than his usual practice concern. I know you have no reason to trust me after what I did, but this situation with Luke, the timing is troubling. Even you must see that. Julian's face had been growing increasingly flushed during the confrontation, the vein in his temple visibly pulsing. Enough of this charade, he snapped, slamming his hand on the desk with enough force to make the crystal paperweight jump. I've indulged this rebellious phase because it served a purpose, flushing Luke's true intentions into the open. But it ends now. He turned to Chris with undisguised contempt. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize this strategy? targeting my daughter to gain leverage? His breathing had become noticeably labored, each word seeming to require more effort than the last. "Julian," Chris said quietly, "you should sit down. Don't tell me what to—" Julian's retort cut off abruptly as he reached for his collar, loosening his tie with clumsy fingers. His complexion shifted from angry red to an alarming pallor, perspiration beading on his forehead. "Father?" Tina stepped toward him, recognizing genuine distress beneath the bluster. Julian's eyes widened with sudden fear as he gripped the edge of the desk. "My chest," he managed, voice barely audible. His knees buckled as he started to sink. "Heart medication?" Chris asked sharply, moving forward to support Julian's weight. "Desk drawer, left side," Marcus answered, already yanking the drawer open with uncharacteristic urgency. "He's been under treatment for 6 months, refuses to slow down." This revelation that her father had been hiding a serious health condition struck Tina with fresh hurt. Another secret kept from her, another way she'd been excluded from the reality of her family's life. Chris lowered Julian carefully into his chair while Marcus located a prescription bottle. Tina watched, momentarily frozen by the surreal shift from confrontation to crisis. Chris's competent handling of the situation, checking Julian's pulse, loosening his collar further, speaking to him in calm, measured tones, revealed yet another facet of this complex man. "I've called an ambulance," Marcus said, handing a small pill to Julian, who placed it under his tongue with shaking fingers. 5 minutes out," Chris confirmed, glancing at his phone. "His color's improving, nitroglycerin working." Julian's breathing gradually steadied, but the fear in his eyes remained. Not just physical distress, but the sudden confrontation with mortality that such episodes forced. He reached for Tina's hand with surprising desperation. "Stay," he whispered. "Please." The simple request, stripped of his usual manipulation and authority, pierced straight through Tina's defenses. Despite everything, this was her father. Flawed, controlling, but undeniably part of her. "I'll go with him to the hospital," she heard herself saying, the decision forming even as she spoke. "Tina," Chris began, concern evident in his expression. "He's my father," she interrupted, a complex mixture of emotions making her voice unsteady. "Whatever else has happened, I can't abandon him now." Understanding flickered in Chris's eyes, though pain shadowed his features. "Of course. Do what you need to do." The paramedics arrived with impressive speed, efficiently transferring Julian to a stretcher while asking clinical questions about his condition. As they prepared to depart, Marcus positioned himself beside Tina, his hand lightly touching her shoulder, in a gesture that managed to seem both solicitous and possessive. "We'll take good care of him," he assured the medical team, his voice carrying just the right note of concerned family member. "Julian is everything to us." The pointed look he directed at Chris over Tina's head made the subtext clear. "You are not family. You have no place here." As they left the penthouse, Tina glanced back. Chris stood motionless in the study doorway, his expression carefully neutral despite the emotion she could sense beneath the surface. For a fleeting moment, doubt crossed his features, not about his feelings, but about her return. The vulnerability in that unguarded second made her heart ache. "I'll call you," she said softly, but the closing elevator doors cut off any response he might have made. In the descending elevator, with Julian on the stretcher and Marcus hovering solicitously, Tina felt a profound sense of dislocation, caught between the life she'd fled and the new possibilities she'd glimpsed with Chris. Her father's medical crisis demanded her immediate attention, but the questions raised during their confrontation couldn't be easily dismissed. Had her connection with Chris been genuine, or part of a calculated strategy tied to his business interests? The timing of their meeting, his history with her father's friend Westridge, the multiple connections to Tobin Media, Each revelation added another layer of complexity to what had felt so pure at the coastal sanctuary. As the ambulance doors closed behind them, Tina caught a glimpse of the penthouse building's elegant facade. High above, a solitary figure stood at the window of her father's study, Chris's powerful silhouette unmistakable against the golden light of sunset. The distance between them felt suddenly vast and possibly unbridgeable. Paradise shattered by the intrusion of a complex reality neither had fully acknowledged. Chapter 8. Truth in Separation. 3 days in the sterile confines of Mount Sinai Hospital had given Tina too much time to think. Her father, stabilized but weakened, slept in the private room while she maintained her vigil from an uncomfortable chair by the window. The doctors had been reassuring, a minor cardiac event exacerbated by stress, not the massive heart attack it had initially appeared to be. From this vantage point, Tina could see a slice of Central Park, vibrant with spring foliage that contrasted sharply with the emotional wasteland she felt inside. No word had come from Chris since that painful parting at the penthouse. His absence felt like a physical ache, yet doubt about his true intentions lingered like poison in her veins. Marcus had been a constant presence, playing the devoted almost son-in-law with remarkable consistency. What surprised Tina most was the occasional glimpse of genuine concern beneath his calculated performance. Once, when he thought she was asleep, she'd seen him speaking quietly with Julian's doctor, his carefully maintained facade cracking too. "Revealed real worry. You should get some rest," he said now, entering with coffee that she knew would be tepid and tasteless. "I can stay with him." "I'm fine," Tina replied automatically, her fingers unconsciously touching the lycra that remained around her neck like a talisman. Marcus's eyes followed the gesture, a complex emotion crossing his face. "He gave you that, didn't he, Luke?" The question lacked the accusatory tone she expected. "Yes," she answered simply. Marcus nodded slowly, settling into the chair opposite hers. "I never gave you anything that wasn't calculated to impress others," he admitted unexpectedly. "I always bought what I thought Julian would approve of, or what would photograph well at events." The candid self-assessment surprised her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because despite what you think of me, what I've given you every reason to think, I did care for you, Tina." He rubbed a hand across his face, suddenly looking older than his 34 years. Not enough to make the right choices, obviously, but enough to recognize when someone values you properly. Before Tina could process this unexpected glimpse of humanity, Julian stirred in the hospital bed. "Tina?" She moved immediately to her father's side, professional medical staff having assured her his condition was stable despite his frail appearance. "I'm here, Father." Julian's hand sought hers with surprising strength. "The board meeting is postponed," she assured him. "You need to focus on recovery." "No." His voice gained strength, a glimpse of the formidable businessman emerging through the patient facade. "It must proceed as scheduled. The Monarch deal will destroy everything Tobin Media stands for," Tina finished quietly. "I know about the archives sale, Father. I've seen the contracts." Alarm flashed across Julian's face before calculation replaced it. "You don't understand the complexities." "I understand perfectly." Tina withdrew a document from her portfolio. "This is the forensic accounting report I commissioned 3 days ago. It details how you've been siphoning company assets into offshore accounts for the past 5 years, masked as operational expenses." The color drained from Julian's face. Behind her, Tina heard Marcus's sharp intake of breath. "You had no right," Julian began. "I had every right," she corrected firmly. "As a board member and major shareholder concerned about the company's inexplicable financial difficulties despite record market growth." Julian's expression hardened. "Whatever you think, you've discovered is already in the hands of the SEC. Tina finished, surprising herself with her steadiness. Along with records of the shell companies you and Marcus established to hide the transfers. Marcus surged to his feet. You're bluffing. Check your email, Tina suggested mildly. The investigators copied you on their formal notification an hour ago. Panic flashed across Marcus's face as he fumbled for his phone, confirming her statement with growing horror. Julian, we need to talk, privately. There's nothing to discuss, Tina interjected. The evidence is conclusive. The only question now is whether you'll face the consequences with dignity or compound the damage with further deception. Julian stared at his daughter as though seeing her for the first time. When did you become so cold? I'm not cold, Father. I'm clear. Tina gathered her documents, suddenly determined to escape the stifling hospital room. For the first time in my life, I'm seeing the situation exactly as it is, not as I wished it to be. As she moved toward the door, Julian called after her. Where are you going? To verify something important. She paused in the doorway. Something I should have trusted from the beginning. The taxi ride downtown passed in a blur of urban motion, Tina's thoughts racing faster than the vehicle navigating Manhattan's congested streets. She'd spent the past 3 days in a fog of doubt, her father's and Marcus's insinuations about Chris's motives eating away at the certainty she'd felt at the coastal sanctuary. Yet with each financial document she'd examined, each record uncovered, during her quiet investigation from the hospital, the truth had become increasingly clear. Her father's empire was built on deception, not just business manipulation, but personal betrayal that had shaped her entire life. The realization that Chris had been truthful all along about her father's financial misconduct had forced her to reconsider everything else she'd been led to doubt. The timing of their meeting, while extraordinary, was no more implausible than any other life-changing encounter. Sometimes fate operated with poetic symmetry that defied cynical interpretation. The Luke Industries headquarters soared above the surrounding buildings, a tower of glass and steel that somehow managed to appear both innovative and timeless, much like its creator. In the lobby, she approached the reception desk with renewed determination. I need to see Christopher Luke. The receptionist regarded her professionally. Do you have an appointment? No, but... Tina hesitated, suddenly uncertain of her welcome after days of silence. Miss Tobin, a familiar voice came from behind her. She turned to find Jensen, Chris's caretaker, dressed incongruously in a business suit rather than his usual casual attire. Jensen, what are you doing here? Mr. Luke asked me to come to the city. His weathered face revealed nothing. He thought you might need a friendly face when you were ready. When I was ready, Tina repeated, confusion evident in her voice. Jensen handed her a sealed envelope. He said to give you this if you came looking for him. Inside was a keycard and an address she didn't recognize, along with a brief note in Chris's distinctive handwriting. When you're ready for the whole truth. See, he's not here? She asked, disappointment washing through her. Not for several days. Jensen's expression softened slightly. He returned to the coast after seeing you at the hospital. You saw me at the hospital? Tina looked up in surprise. Jensen nodded. Mr. Luke came every night while you were sleeping. Watched over you and your father from the hallway, made sure the best specialists were consulted. He didn't want to intrude, but he couldn't stay away entirely. The revelation struck Tina with unexpected force. While she'd been doubting him, he'd been quietly ensuring her father received optimal care, despite everything Julian had done to discredit him. The address, Jensen continued, it's where he left something for you, something important. The location led to a nondescript building in Chelsea, an old warehouse converted into private offices. The keycard admitted her to a small suite on the top floor, where a single desk held a laptop and a thick folder labeled with her name. When she opened the laptop, it immediately played a video message from Chris. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes and stubble shadowing his jaw. "Tina," he began, his deep voice sending an involuntary shiver down her spine despite the digital medium. "If you're watching this, you've begun to question the narrative your father presented. The laptop contains everything, the complete history of Luke Industries' interest in Tobin Media, my past with Richard Westridge, and documentation of your father's systematic financial misconduct." Chris's expression grew more intense. "What you won't find is any evidence that I orchestrated our meeting or manipulated our connection. Some coincidences truly are fate, Tina. Meeting you was the most authentic thing that's happened to me in years." The video ended with an address, different from this office, and a simple closing. "If you want to talk, you know where to find me. I'll be waiting." Tina spent hours reviewing the documentation, each file confirming Chris's version of events, while revealing her father's deception in stark detail. Most damning were records showing Julian had initiated contact with Luke Industries, approaching them as a potential buyer while simultaneously arranging the Monarch Media deal that would strip Tobin Media of its most valuable assets before any acquisition completed. As evening approached, Tina sat back, emotionally drained yet oddly peaceful. The truth, however painful, brought clarity that deception never could. She now understood exactly who her father was, not the titan of industry she'd idolized growing up, but a desperate man who'd sacrificed principle for profit and family, for power. She also understood, with crystalline certainty, who Chris Luke truly was, a man who had found her worthy of truth, even when it might have been easier to manipulate her, a man who had respected her independence enough to wait for her to discover reality on her own terms. When she finally emerged from the office, night had fallen over the city. The address Chris had provided in the video beckoned some neutral meeting place he'd arranged, expecting she might need space for their conversation. But as she stood on the sidewalk, the weight of revelation settling into her bones, Tina realized she didn't want neutral ground or careful distance. What she wanted was to return to the beginning, to the moment when fate or chance had brought them together in a convergence too meaningful to be dismissed as mere coincidence. The taxi driver looked surprised when she gave him the address of Chris's Manhattan mansion instead of the location from the video. "You sure, lady? That's way uptown." "I'm sure," Tina replied, newfound certainty strengthening her voice. "It's where everything started." As the taxi pulled away from the curb, rain began to fall, a poetic symmetry that wasn't lost on her. The chief, weather matching her first arrival at Chris's door, seemed like the final confirmation that some stories were written by hands larger than human calculation could account for. The mansion where they'd first met loomed ahead, a single light burning in the library window like a beacon guiding her home. Chapter 9, Passions Crescendo. Rain began to fall as Tina approached the gates of Chris's mansion, a poetic symmetry that wasn't lost on her. Just as on that first night, water streamed from the sky in sheets, soaking through her light blazer within seconds. Unlike that night, however, the gates stood open, an invitation she couldn't ignore. Her heart pounded in her chest as she made her way up the familiar path, past manicured gardens now glistening with raindrops. The massive front door yielded to her touch, opening into the dimly lit foyer she remembered so vividly. Water pooled around her feet as she stood dripping on imported marble, echoing her first unceremonious arrival. Following instinct, she moved down the corridor toward the library, drawn by the warm glow spilling from beneath the door. She paused, with her hand on the ornate handle, gathering courage before pushing it open. The library appeared exactly as it had on that stormy night weeks ago, a fire crackling in the massive stone fireplace, leather-bound volumes lining the walls in silent testimony to centuries of human wisdom. But instead of finding Chris by the window, or seated in one of the armchairs, she discovered only a single red rose laid across the antique desk. Beside it lay a folded map, with her name written on the outside in Chris's distinctive handwriting. Curious, she opened it to reveal the layout of the mansion with a series of X marks designating specific locations. Beneath the first X, the library, was a simple note. The journey begins where we did, but continues through each moment that defined us. A smile tugged at her lips despite the tension thrumming through her. The literary, thoughtful gesture was quintessentially Chris, a treasure hunt through their shared history that would reveal far more than words alone could convey. The second X marked a guest bedroom on the second floor. Making her way up the sweeping staircase, Tina found the door slightly ajar. Inside, on the perfectly made bed where she'd spent her first night in his home, sat a crystal wine glass, unmistakably the one she'd used during their midnight conversation. A small card leaned against it, where I first recognized something in you worth knowing, intelligence and passion beneath social polish. I'd never met anyone who could quote Dante in original Italian while dripping on my Persian rug. Warmth spread through her chest at the memory of that first real connection, when they'd both glimpsed beyond carefully constructed facades to something authentic beneath. The map led her next to a garden pavilion, marked with the third X. Though rain continued to fall, a covered pathway allowed her to reach it without further drenching. Inside the glass-walled structure, she found Chris's easel with a sketch prominently displayed, the sunrise he'd been painting the morning after her arrival, when she'd discovered him creating beauty in solitude. The accompanying note read, "Where? You caught me being myself. Not the CEO or the billionaire, just the boy who found peace in art. No one had seen me that way in years." Emotion tightened her throat as she traced the bold charcoal strokes, recognizing how that moment had shifted. Something fundamental between them. She'd glimpsed the truth of him then, not the polished businessman, but the artist with a wounded soul. Following the map's guidance, Tina continued through the mansion, each marked location revealing another artifact of their brief but profound connection. In the kitchen, she found the vintage cookbook open to the French toast recipe he'd prepared for their first breakfast. In the music room, sheet music for Beethoven's Für Elise rested on the piano, the piece his 7-year-old self had played before tragedy forever altered his life. Each object, each memory, dismantled another layer of doubt that her father and Marcus had so carefully constructed. This was not the strategy of a corporate raider, but the vulnerability of a man laying bare his soul. The sixth X led to a small room she'd never seen before, a private study distinct from the grand library. Here, business files and technological equipment created a stark contrast to the artistic touches that dominated his other spaces. On the desk lay a thick folder labeled Westridge Capital, The Truth. Inside, Tina found court documents and confidential settlements, telling a very different story than her father had implied. Far from betraying his mentor, Chris had uncovered Richard Westridge's systematic exploitation of young programmers, stealing their innovations while leaving them with nothing but empty promises. When Westridge had demanded Chris do the same, to a talented but vulnerable teenage coder, Chris had refused, protecting the boy and leaving the company with nothing but his own original work. The legal battle that followed had nearly destroyed him financially, but he'd stood firm on principle. The final document showed that Chris had eventually established a foundation for young tech innovators, with Richard Westridge's son, who had recognized his father's wrongdoing, serving on the board. A note in Chris's handwriting concluded, "I've never publicly told this story. The press narratives were easier to ignore than correct, and revenge never interested me as much as creating something better. But you deserve to know who I really am, not the villain your father painted." Tears pricked Tina's eyes as another piece of the puzzle fell into place. The man she'd come to care for deeply had been systematically misrepresented by those who should have been most honest with her. The map's final X led back outside to a waiting car with Jensen at the wheel. The loyal caretaker offered no explanation, simply handed her a small envelope as she settled into the back seat. Inside was a photograph of the hidden studio at the coastal sanctuary, with a message that made her heart race. The journey continues, where we truly began to see each other. Follow the path to where you discovered my soul on canvas, and I hope to discover if what we found was real. As Jensen drove through rain-slicked streets toward the helipad where Chris's private helicopter waited, Tina found herself at a crossroads more significant than any she'd faced before. Returning to the sanctuary meant choosing Chris and all. He represented authenticity, vulnerability, the courage to create a life on one's own terms. It meant walking away from the Tobin legacy, at least as her father had defined it. Yet as city lights gave way to darkness during the flight north, certainty settled within her. The path forward had never been clearer, despite the complications that surely awaited. She had spent her life being Julian Tobin's daughter and nearly become Marcus Henderson's wife, always defined in relation to someone else. With Chris, she had glimpsed the possibility of partnership based on mutual recognition of true selves. The helicopter descended toward the familiar cliffside property, now illuminated by hundreds of lanterns, creating a glowing path from the landing pad to the main house. The sight took her breath away. Tiny flames defying the darkness, just as truth had gradually overcome deception. As she followed the lantern-lit trail, Tina's steps quickened with anticipation. Each landmark she passed, the yoga studio, the freshwater pool, the meditation garden, carried memories of discoveries made during her brief stay. But it was the weathered barn studio that drew her like a magnet, the place where Chris's true self had been most nakedly revealed to her. The door stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling onto the rain-dampened path. Heart pounding, she pushed. It opened to find the space transformed. Candles illuminated the rough-hewn walls where Chris's artwork hung, each piece a window into his soul. In the center, a single painting stood on an easel, covered with a cloth. Beside it lay a folded piece of paper containing a passage from the Dante that they had discussed on their first night. L'amor che muove il sole e l'altre stelle. The love that moves the sun and the other stars. Below these words, Chris had written, "Where we began is where we must decide if we end." With trembling fingers, Tina lifted the cloth from the painting. What she discovered stole her breath. Not a completed artwork, but a canvas with only the outline of two figures standing at a cliff's edge, their forms suggested rather than defined, facing a horizon that stretched infinite with possibility. The title, written in Chris's hand along the bottom edge, was simply "The Choice." She understood the message immediately. Their story remained unfinished, the final image yet to be painted through choices they would make together or apart. A sound behind her made her turn. There in the doorway stood Chris, rain-dampened and vulnerable, watching her with those extraordinary eyes that had seen her true self from the very beginning. Chapter 10. Love's Culmination. Time seemed to suspend as Tina and Chris stood facing each other across the studio, the distance between them charged with unspoken emotions. Rain drummed against the roof, creating a cocoon of sound that isolated them from the world outside. For a moment, neither moved, each drinking in the sight of the other after days of painful separation. "You found me?" Chris said, his deep voice roughened with emotion. "I followed the path you left," Tina replied, her fingers brushing the unfinished painting between them. "Though I think I would have found my way here eventually, map or no map." Chris took a tentative step forward, his expression a complex interplay of hope and vulnerability. "And now that you're here," the question carried the weight of everything, unresolved between them. The doubts her father had sown, the truths revealed through separation, the future waiting to be defined by the choices they made in this moment. "Now I need to hear it directly from you," Tina said, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. "No maps, no artifacts, no messages left for me to find. Just your truth, in your words." Something shifted in Chris's eyes, a recognition of the moment's importance that straightened his posture and brought him fully into his strength. No longer the guarded billionaire or the reluctant host, he stood before her as simply himself, a man with nothing left to hide. "From the moment you stumbled into my library, soaking wet and defiant, I recognized something in you that called to the deepest part of me," he began, his voice gaining confidence with each word. "Not the Tobin heiress or the society figure, but a woman fighting to break free of definitions imposed by others. I saw myself in that struggle, the boy who'd refused to be shaped by circumstance or others' expectations." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight stubble shadowing his jaw. "I never planned to feel this way, Tina. After Westridge's betrayal, I built walls that no one had breached in 15 years. Then suddenly there you were, quoting Dante in original Italian while dripping on my Persian rug, and something inside me recognized you as important." A smile ghosted across his lips at the memory. "The business connection with your father's company existed before we met, that much is true. But it was always about creating something meaningful, never about exploitation or corporate games. The Renaissance Rising Foundation represents everything I believe in, that art saves lives, that beauty matters, that creative expression can heal wounds that nothing else touches." His voice dropped lower, more intimate. "What I didn't tell your father, what I couldn't explain in that confrontation, was that the merger proposal changed after I met you. Originally, it was just smart business with a philanthropic component. Then I saw your passion for photography, the way you truly saw my art, how you understood immediately that creativity isn't just a hobby, but oxygen for certain souls. And suddenly, the merger became about creating something together, something that honored both our visions." Tina felt tears threatening as the sincerity in his words resonated with what her heart had known from the beginning. "And when I left with my father," pain flickered across Chris's features, "I thought I'd lost you, that the doubts he planted had taken root too deeply for anything real to grow between us. But I couldn't leave without giving you a path back. If you wanted to find it," he closed the remaining distance between them, standing before the unfinished painting that symbolized their undefined future. "I've spent my life in careful control, Tina, building walls to protect myself from further loss. Until you, I'd never met anyone worth the risk of tearing them down." With trembling fingers he reached out, not quite touching her. "I love you," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of a man who had never spoken them to another living soul. Not as an acquisition or a strategic alliance, but as the woman who saw the real me and didn't turn away, the woman who understood the language of my art before knowing the artist, the woman who makes me want to create a future rather than just survive the present. The naked vulnerability in his confession broke the last chains of doubt binding Tina's heart. She stepped forward, closing the final inches between them, her hand finding his. "When I left here, I was running from uncertainty," she admitted. "I'd spent my life being defined by others. Julian Tobin's daughter, the Tobin media heiress, Marcus's perfectly appropriate fiancée. Then suddenly there was you, seeing me as I'd always hoped to be seen, but feared never would be. Her free hand rose to touch his face, fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. It terrified me, Chris, the intensity of what I felt after knowing you such a short time, the possibility that it might be manipulation rather than miracle. Her eyes held his, unflinching in their honesty. But every document I reviewed, every piece of evidence I uncovered, just confirmed what my heart already knew, that what happened between us was the most authentic thing I've ever experienced. The confession hung in the air between them, a truth too powerful to be contained by careful words. "I love you," she whispered, "not as an escape from my former life or a rebellion against my father, but as the man who showed me what freedom really means, the courage to be wholly, uncompromisingly oneself." For a heartbeat, neither moved, the magnitude of their mutual declaration creating a sacred stillness. Then Chris's hands cradled her face with exquisite gentleness, his eyes searching hers one final time before his lips claimed hers in a kiss that contained worlds of meaning. Unlike their previous embraces, this held nothing back, no reservations, no carefully maintained boundaries. Tina wound her arms around his neck, pressing herself against the solid warmth of his body as the kiss deepened into something primal and transformative. Years of isolation and protective distance dissolved in the heat building between them, replaced by a connection that transcended physical desire. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Chris rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me," he whispered, the simple request carrying layers of meaning. "Not just tonight, but for all the nights to come. Help me finish this painting, our painting, with all the colors we discover together." In answer, Tina reached for his hand and led him from the studio toward the main house. No further words were needed as they moved through the rain-washed night, the path illuminated by lanterns that couldn't match the brightness igniting within them. In the sanctuary of his bedroom, their bedroom now, they came together with a passion that transcended physical joining. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered endearment erased another scar left by years of loneliness. In the flickering firelight, they discovered each other completely, bodies and souls entwining in a communion that felt like coming home to a place neither had known existed. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms as rain continued to drum against the windows, Chris traced patterns on the bare skin of Tina's shoulder. "I have something to show you tomorrow," he murmured, his voice carrying the peaceful contentment of a man who had finally found his harbor after years adrift. "More surprises?" she asked, smiling against his chest. "Plans," he corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. "For the mansion in the city. I've been working with architects on transforming it into headquarters for a joint foundation, combining Renaissance Rising with a new media education initiative under the Tobin name." Tina raised herself on one elbow to see his face more clearly. "You do that? Honor my family's legacy despite everything my father did?" "Your family's legacy is larger than your father's mistakes," Chris said, brushing a strand of hair from her face with tender precision. "The Tobin name has stood for journalistic excellence for 80 years. That deserves to be preserved, even as we build something new together." The thoughtfulness of his vision, honoring her past while creating their future, moved her deeply. "And us?" she asked, the question encompassing all the practical considerations they had yet to address. "The board vote, the SEC investigation, the merger." Chris silenced her with a gentle kiss. "All logistics that we'll handle together as equal partners in everything that matters." His expression grew more serious. "I don't care about corporate structures or who owns what percentage of which company. What matters is the work we can do together, the lives we can change through arts education, the stories we can tell through media that believes in truth and beauty." Seeing the sincerity in his eyes, Tina felt the last lingering tension leave. Her body, Whatever challenges awaited, and there would be many, they would face them standing side by side, each bringing their unique strengths to a partnership founded on mutual respect and genuine love. 1 year later, the mansion where they had first met had been transformed beyond recognition. The East Wing now housed the offices of the Tobin Luke Foundation for Arts and Media Education, while the Grand Ballroom hosted regular exhibitions from emerging artists discovered through their community programs. But it was the library, that sacred space where fate or chance had first brought them together, that remained unchanged, preserved as a private sanctuary amidst the purposeful evolution surrounding it. On this particular evening, Tina stood at the window watching another spring storm roll across the Manhattan skyline. Behind her, the door opened to admit Chris, home from a day of mentoring young artists at their Brooklyn center. "I brought something for you," he said, his voice still carrying that special tone reserved only for her. Tina turned to find him holding a handcrafted book bound in soft leather. As she accepted it, she recognized his meticulous craftsmanship in every detail, from the hand-stitched binding to the carefully lettered title, The Journey Home. Opening it, she discovered a chronicle of their extraordinary path, pressed flowers from the coastal garden, sketches of significant moments, journal entries dating back to the first night they'd met. Each page revealed another layer of the story they'd written together, culminating in a reproduction of the painting they'd completed as a joint project. The Choice, now showing two figures standing hand in hand at the cliff's edge, facing a horizon bright with promise. On the final page was the sketch Chris had made of her that first night in his library, her rain-soaked and defiant, exhausted yet determined. Beneath it, in his distinctive handwriting, were the words he'd thought but couldn't say aloud then, "The moment my soul finally came home." Emotion welled within Tina as she closed the book, cradling it against her heart. "It's perfect," she whispered, moving into the circle of his arms. "A beautiful record of our past, and a foundation for our future," Chris added, his hand coming to rest with gentle wonder on the slight curve of her abdomen. Their child, just beginning the journey into being. As lightning illuminated the library, in a brilliant flash, they sealed their continuing story with a kiss that contained all they had been and all they would become. Two souls who had found in each other not just love, but the courage to create something transcendent from the wreckage of the past. Outside, the storm continued its dramatic percussion, much as it had on the night of their first meeting. But within the sanctuary they had built together, there was only warmth, connection, and the profound peace that comes when hearts finally find their true home.